There's a moment that defines Leo Heremans' entire approach to pigeon racing, and most people have never heard about it. It's not about a champion bird. It's not about a famous race win. It's about a decision he made in 1987 that reveals everything about how he thinks. A visitor came to his loft, a wealthy fancier who'd been buying expensive birds from auctions across Europe with limited success. He looked at Heremans' birds and said, "I don't understand. Your birds look ordinary. They're not the biggest, not the flashiest. I've bought birds that look better than yours, cost 10 times more, and they don't perform half as well. What's the difference?" Heremans took him to the breeding loft and pointed at an unremarkable blue hen sitting quietly in a nest box. "That hen," he said, "has never won a race. She placed in club races, nothing special. But her mother produced 7 birds that won races. Her grandmother produced 11 birds that won races. And this hen, in 3 years of breeding, has produced 9 offspring. 6 of them won races. 3 of them are now in my breeding loft producing the next generation. That hen is worth more to me than any champion you can buy at auction, because she doesn't just win, she creates winners." That's the difference between buying performance and building performance. The visitor didn't understand. He went back to buying champions at auctions. Heremans went back to his breeding records, his selection system, his patient multi-generational program. 10 years later, Heremans' Bloodline was dominating races across Belgium and being sought after worldwide. The visitor was still buying and hoping, never building anything lasting. That story captures the essence of the Heremans Method. It's not about individual champions, though Heremans produced many. It's not about expensive purchases, though Heremans' birds eventually sold for enormous prices. It's not about shortcuts or secrets or luck. It's about systematic long-term thinking applied with absolute discipline to create something that transcends any individual bird, a dynasty of consistent genetic quality that produces champions generation after generation. Today we're going to examine exactly how Heremans built that dynasty. Not the mythology, not the simplified versions you hear at club meetings, but the actual detailed methodology he used over 40 years to transform from a club-level fancier to one of the most influential breeders in pigeon racing history. This isn't hero worship. This is analysis of a systematic approach that worked and that contains lessons every serious breeder can apply regardless of their current level or resources. Let's start with Heremans' foundational philosophy, because everything else flows from this. Most fanciers focus on racing results. They want to win this week's race, this season's championship. Their entire focus is on immediate competitive performance. Heremans certainly wanted to win races, but his primary focus was always on building genetic quality that would produce consistent performance across decades. He thought in terms of bloodline development, not individual race results. Every decision, which birds to keep, which to cull, which to pair, which offspring to breed from, was evaluated through the lens of long-term genetic impact, not short-term racing success. This philosophical difference manifests in hundreds of daily decisions that accumulate over years into completely different outcomes. A typical fancier keeps a bird because it won an important race, even if that bird doesn't produce quality offspring. Heremans would cull that bird after testing its production and move on. A typical fancier buys expensive birds hoping to inject champion genetics. Heremans rarely bought birds, and when he did, he tested them ruthlessly and kept only what proved to integrate well with his program. A typical fancier breeds from many different birds trying to increase their odds of producing a champion. Heremans bred from a small number of proven birds, concentrating genetics he'd verified through years of testing. The mindset is fundamentally different. Most fanciers are consumers of genetics, always looking outside for the next great bird to buy. Heremans was a creator of genetics, focused on developing his own consistent bloodlines through selection. This shift from consumer to creator is the first lesson of the Heremans Method. You cannot build a dynasty by constantly buying. You build by testing, selecting, and systematically improving your own genetics over many years. Now let's examine Heremans' testing and selection system, because this is where philosophy becomes practical methodology. Heremans' approach to testing young birds was more thorough and more patient than typical fanciers. He didn't race birds heavily in their first year. Young birds in their first season were trained and entered in short local races, primarily to evaluate their basic capabilities, health, trap discipline, orientation ability. But he didn't make final breeding decisions based on first-year performance. Second year was more intensive testing. Birds that showed promise in first year were raced more seriously in second year at varied distances and conditions. This is when he gathered real performance data that informed breeding decisions. But even second-year results weren't final. Some late developers didn't show their best until third year. Some early stars faded by third year. Heremans gave birds 3 years of testing before making definitive decisions about their breeding value. This patience is almost unheard of in modern racing, where people want immediate results and make breeding decisions after one season. Heremans understood that genetic quality reveals itself over time, not instantly. A bird that wins dramatically as a young bird might have gotten lucky with weather conditions or race circumstances. A bird that wins consistently across 3 years at multiple distances in varying conditions is demonstrating genetic quality, not luck. After 3 years of testing, Heremans made his selection. Only the birds that proved themselves consistently entered the breeding loft. This typically meant keeping maybe 5 to 10% of what he bred. The rest were culled, sold, or kept as stock birds but not used for serious breeding. This extreme selection pressure, keeping only the proven best from large numbers tested, is what allowed him to concentrate superior genetics. But here's where Heremans' system gets more sophisticated. He didn't just test racing performance. He tested breeding performance separately and considered it equally important. A bird that raced exceptionally well was bred from experimentally. Its first offspring were tested through racing. If those offspring performed well, the parent bird's status elevated. If those offspring performed poorly, the parent bird's breeding role was reduced or eliminated despite its own racing success. This two-tier selection, racing performance first, then production performance, ensured that Heremans was breeding from birds that both performed well themselves and transmitted that performance genetically. Many birds can race well through favorable combinations of genes that don't pass consistently to offspring. Heremans filtered those out by requiring production proof before committing to long-term breeding use. The production testing took additional years. A bird might prove itself racing by age 3, get bred from age 4 to 6, with offspring tested through age 7 to 9. By the time Heremans confirmed a bird was a truly valuable producer, that bird might be 8 to 10 years old. Most fanciers would have already bred from that bird extensively and moved on to new birds. Heremans was just getting started with confirmed producers. He'd breed from proven producers for another 5 to 10 years, creating entire families of related birds that carried concentrated genetics from those proven ancestors. This extraordinarily patient approach to testing and selection is completely opposite to the modern tendency to breed from young birds immediately, hope for the best, and constantly cycle through new genetics. Heremans' method takes longer to establish but creates far more stable, reliable bloodlines once established. Let's examine Heremans' approach to record keeping because this enabled everything else. Heremans maintained meticulous breeding records for every bird, not just pedigrees showing parents and grandparents, but performance records showing every race result, breeding records showing every offspring produced, and most importantly, production analysis showing which bird's offspring succeeded at racing and breeding. These records allowed him to identify patterns that casual observation would miss. He could see that a particular hen, even though she only placed in races, had produced 4 daughters that all won races. That hen was genetically valuable despite her modest racing record. He could see that a particular cock, despite winning major races, produced only mediocre offspring across multiple seasons with different hens. That cock was genetically less valuable despite his impressive racing record. The records also allowed him to track maternal lines across generations. Heremans paid special attention to maternal families because he observed that production ability seemed to run consistently in female lines. A hen whose mother was a good producer, whose grandmother was a good producer, was very likely to be a good producer herself. This multi-generational maternal line tracking became central to his breeding strategy. When selecting breeding birds, Heremans would examine not just the bird's own performance but 3 generations of maternal line production records. A bird from a proven producing maternal line had much higher probability of becoming a valuable producer itself. This insight, that breeding ability is more reliably predicted by family production history than by individual racing performance, revolutionized how Heremans approached breeding and is one of the most important lessons from his method. Now let's discuss Heremans' actual breeding strategy, how he paired birds, and what he was trying to accomplish genetically. Heremans practiced what's called modified line breeding. He didn't inbreed as tightly as some famous breeders like the Jansen brothers, but he didn't outcross indiscriminately either. His approach was to establish several related but distinct families within his loft, breed primarily within those families to maintain consistency, and occasionally cross between families or bring in outside genetics to introduce specific traits. Within his proven families, he practiced line breeding back to exceptional producing birds. If he had a hen that proved to be an exceptional producer, he would breed her daughters back to her sons or to the cock that produced exceptionally well with her. This concentrated her genetics in subsequent generations, but he didn't inbreed so tightly that he created health problems. He maintained enough genetic diversity within lines to avoid the fragility that extreme inbreeding causes. When he introduced outside genetics, which he did very selectively, maybe once every 5 to 10 years, he looked for birds that excelled in specific characteristics his birds lacked. He wasn't buying champions for the sake of famous names. He was strategically acquiring genetics that filled specific gaps. And when he introduced outside birds, He tested them extensively by breeding to his best birds and evaluating the crosses before deciding whether to incorporate the outside genetics permanently. Most crosses failed his testing. The outside genetics didn't combine well with his established lines, or the offspring didn't perform better than his purebred birds. He would eliminate those crosses and try different outside sources. Occasionally a cross worked beautifully, and he would gradually incorporate those genetics, breeding the successful crosses back to his main lines, to blend the new traits into his established bloodlines. This strategic use of outside genetics, infrequent, targeted, tested rigorously, is very different from the common practice of constantly buying new birds and breeding them randomly throughout the loft. Heremans protected his established genetic base and only allowed outside genetics that proved to enhance it. Let's talk about Heremans' management philosophy, because genetic selection only works if birds are healthy and properly managed. Heremans was fanatic about several aspects of management. First, loft environment. His lofts were clean, well-ventilated, free from drafts, with good natural light. He believed strongly that birds needed optimal environment to express their genetic potential. Poor environment masked genetic quality, making selection less accurate. Second, nutrition. Heremans fed high-quality feed but not excessively. He believed in birds maintaining racing fitness year-round, not getting fat in off-season. His birds were fed enough to maintain excellent condition, but not enough to become heavy or lazy. This consistent moderate feeding kept birds healthy and made it easier to condition them for racing without dramatic diet changes. Third, health program. Heremans worked closely with veterinarians and used preventive health measures to minimize disease. He vaccinated for common diseases, maintained strict quarantine for new birds, monitored health constantly, but he didn't medicate unnecessarily. He used treatments when specific problems were identified, not routinely just in case. This preserved the bird's natural immune function and avoided creating resistant diseases through overuse of medications. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, stress management. Heremans was known for running an extremely quiet loft during racing season. He didn't allow visitors. He didn't constantly handle birds. He didn't make unnecessary changes to routine or environment. He believed that racing created enough stress and the loft needed to be a place of complete calm and predictability, where birds could rest and recover. This last point, stress minimization, is something most fanciers ignore. They have constant activity in the loft, visitors looking at birds, birds being moved around, changes to feeding schedules, noise and disturbance. All of this creates chronic stress that suppresses immune function, impairs recovery, and prevents birds from performing at their genetic potential. Heremans understood that calm, consistent, predictable environment allowed genetic quality to express fully. Now let's examine one of the most famous aspects of the Heremans Method, his approach to racing strategy and when to race birds. Heremans did not race birds heavily in their first year. This was unusual then and remains unusual now. Most fanciers want to test young birds extensively in their first season. Heremans believed young birds needed time to mature physically and mentally before being stressed heavily. His young birds in first year flew training flights, entered a few short local races to learn the process, but were not pushed hard. Second year was when serious racing began. Birds were entered in a full schedule of races at varied distances. This is when he evaluated their true capability. Third year continued serious racing for the best birds from second year, confirming which birds were genuinely consistent performers versus which had gotten lucky in second year. This multi-year approach to racing evaluation gave him more reliable data than single-year testing. It also kept birds healthier. Birds that weren't over-raced as youngsters lasted longer in their racing careers and transitioned better to breeding careers. Heremans had breeding birds that remained productive well into their teens because they hadn't been burned out by excessive racing when young. For breeding birds, Heremans typically didn't race them at all once they entered the breeding loft. Some fanciers race their breeding birds to keep them sharp or prove they still have it. Heremans believed breeding birds should focus on breeding. Racing created stress and risk of injury or loss. Breeding birds were too valuable to risk. They stayed home, bred multiple rounds per season, and their value was measured by what they produced, not what they raced. This separation of roles, racing birds focus on racing, breeding birds focus on breeding, allowed both to excel at their specific functions. It also meant Heremans could breed more rounds per season from his best producers because they weren't being depleted by racing. Let's discuss Heremans' approach to what many consider his greatest strength, maternal line selection. Heremans observed early in his career that the best predictor of a bird's breeding value was its maternal line's production history. A hen whose mother produced winners, whose grandmother produced winners, had very high probability of also producing winners even if her own racing record was modest. This led him to select breeding hens primarily based on maternal line production, not primarily on their own racing performance. He would keep hens for breeding whose racing was just adequate if they came from proven producing maternal lines. He would cull hens who raced brilliantly if they came from families with poor production history. This was counterintuitive to most fanciers, but proved correct through his results. Heremans tracked maternal lines back 3 to 5 generations. He gave each major maternal family in his loft an identity in his records and monitored which families consistently produced quality. Families that produced consistently received more breeding opportunities. Families that produced inconsistently were gradually phased out, even if individual birds from those families had good racing records. This focus on families rather than individuals is sophisticated breeding strategy that most fanciers miss. Individual birds can be exceptional through fortunate genetic combinations that don't repeat. Families that consistently produce across generations demonstrate genetic quality that breeds true. Heremans was breeding from families, using individuals as representatives of proven family genetics. For cocks, Heremans was more flexible. He selected cocks primarily on racing performance, looking for exceptional racers to breed to his proven maternal lines, but he still tested their production. A cock that raced brilliantly but produced poorly didn't remain in the breeding loft long. Heremans would try different cocks with his proven hens until he found cocks that both raced well and produced well when paired with his maternal lines. The combination of selecting hens primarily on maternal line production and cocks primarily on racing performance, with both tested for actual production results, created a selection system that concentrated racing ability and breeding ability simultaneously. Many breeding programs concentrate one or the other, but not both. Heremans' system concentrated both. Now let's talk about one of the hardest aspects of the Heremans method to implement, the culling discipline. Heremans was ruthless about culling birds that didn't meet his standards. If a bird didn't prove itself racing by year 3, culled. If a bird proved itself racing but didn't produce quality offspring by year 6, culled from breeding loft. If a maternal line stopped producing consistently, entire family culled. If outside genetics didn't integrate successfully within 2 generations, culled. This constant culling meant his loft was always populated by proven genetics. There were no mediocre birds kept for sentimental reasons. No birds kept because they had famous pedigrees. No birds kept because they cost a lot of money. Only proven performers and proven producers remained. Everything else left. Most fanciers struggle with this level of culling. They become attached to birds. They remember a bird's one great race and keep breeding from it despite years of mediocre production. They keep birds whose pedigree looks good, even though the bird's actual results are poor. They can't bear to cull a bird they paid significant money for, even though it hasn't performed. All of this emotional decision-making prevents genetic progress. Heremans made breeding decisions based purely on data from his records. If the numbers said a bird wasn't valuable, emotion didn't override that conclusion. The bird left. This clinical approach feels cold, but it's what creates genetic progress. You cannot improve genetics unless you prevent inferior genetics from breeding. Culling is selection. Without culling, there's no selection pressure. Without selection pressure, there's no genetic improvement. The one area where Heremans showed patience was with birds from proven maternal lines. Even if a young hen from a proven line didn't race exceptionally, he would test her production before culling. Many of his best producing hens were modest racers from exceptional maternal lines. But if those hens failed to produce after adequate testing, they were culled too. The maternal line history gave them opportunity to prove themselves as producers, but it didn't excuse production failure. Let's examine Heremans' approach to pedigree and what he looked for in evaluating bloodlines. Heremans certainly valued good pedigrees, but his definition of good pedigree differed from most people's. Most fanciers think a good pedigree means famous names and champion ancestors. Heremans thought a good pedigree meant documented production across multiple generations with specific attention to maternal line productivity. When evaluating a pedigree, Heremans looked past the names to the actual production records. A pedigree showing a grandmother who produced 8 winners was more valuable to him than a pedigree showing a grandfather who won a national ace pigeon title. The producing grandmother would likely pass breeding ability. The ace pigeon grandfather might or might not pass racing ability genetically. Heremans also looked for balance in pedigrees. He wanted to see quality on both sides, mother and father, but with particular emphasis on depth in the maternal line. A bird with 3 generations of proven producers on the mother's side and decent racing performance on the father's side was ideal. A bird with famous racers throughout the pedigree but no production documentation was suspect. When Heremans did purchase outside birds, which was rare, he insisted on complete documentation of production history, not just racing results. Sellers who couldn't provide detailed production records across generations didn't sell birds to Heremans. He was buying proven genetics, not hopeful genetics. Now let's discuss the timeline of building a dynasty using Heremans' methods. Because understanding the timeline sets realistic expectations. Heremans started seriously applying his systematic approach in the early 1980s. By the late 1980s, maybe 5 to 7 years later, he had established consistent families that produced reliably. By the mid-1990s, 10 to 15 years in, His bloodline was recognized regionally as exceptional quality. By the 2000s, 20 years after starting his systematic program, his birds were dominating internationally and selling for enormous prices. 20 years, not 2 years, not 5 years. 20 years to go from good local fancier to internationally recognized breeder of exceptional bloodlines. This timeline is crucial to understand because it shows that building genuine dynasty-level genetics takes decades of consistent application of sound principles. There are no shortcuts. You cannot compress 20 years of selection and testing into 5 years. The genetics requires generational time to prove consistency. Many fanciers give up after 3 to 5 years when they don't see dramatic results. They change strategies, buy different bloodlines, try new approaches, and never give any approach enough time to work. Heremans picked a sound approach and stuck with it for 20 years. The results came because the time and consistency allowed genuine genetic quality to develop and concentrate. If you're starting today with proper method, expect 5 years before you have established families that breed somewhat consistently. Expect 10 years before you have bloodlines that consistently produce quality for you and others. Expect 15 to 20 years before you have something that could legitimately be called dynasty-level genetics that perform consistently across diverse conditions and in many breeders' hands. That's the realistic timeline. Accept it and commit to it, or accept that you'll never build something truly lasting. Let's talk about adaptability with inconsistency, because Heremans' method wasn't rigidly unchanging. He had core principles that never changed. Test thoroughly, select ruthlessly, focus on maternal lines, concentrate proven genetics, cull inadequate genetics. But within those principles, he adapted to new information and changing conditions. When scientific knowledge about nutrition improved, he adjusted his feeding program. When better disease prevention became available through vaccines, he incorporated that. When he discovered specific training methods that improved navigation, he used them. When testing revealed that certain pairing strategies produced better than others, he adjusted pairings. The core principles remained constant, but the implementation details evolved as he learned. This combination of consistency in principles and flexibility in implementation is sophisticated thinking that many breeders lack. Some breeders never change anything, sticking with outdated practices because that's how it's always been done. Others change everything constantly, chasing every new idea without ever committing long enough to evaluate results. Heremans maintained core principles while continuously refining implementation. That's how you improve over decades without losing the foundation that works. Now let's address the question of whether Heremans' method can be replicated by regular fanciers with modest resources. The answer is yes, with the understanding that you'll build at your scale, not Heremans' scale. Heremans eventually had large facilities, multiple lofts, substantial numbers of birds. You don't need that to apply his principles. You can apply systematic testing and selection with 15 young birds per year, just as effectively as with 50. You can maintain detailed records with a notebook, just as effectively as with sophisticated software. You can practice maternal line selection with 3 breeding pairs just as effectively as with 20 pairs. You can cull ruthlessly with small numbers just as effectively as with large numbers. The principles scale. What you cannot replicate without resources is the speed and scale of development. Heremans breeding 40 young birds per year, keeping the best 3, makes faster progress than you breeding 15 young birds per year, keeping the best 2. But both of you make progress if the selection methodology is sound. Your dynasty will be smaller and take longer to establish, but it can be just as solid genetically for your scale. The key is not comparing yourself to Heremans' scale, but applying his principles to your scale consistently for the necessary time. A small breeder applying Heremans' principles for 15 years will develop better genetics than a large breeder applying poor principles for 15 years. Method matters more than resources. Let's examine some common misunderstandings about Heremans' approach. Misunderstanding 1. People think Heremans succeeded because he had access to exceptional foundation birds. False. His foundation birds were decent local Belgian stock, good but not exceptional. What made them exceptional was 20 years of testing, selection, and line breeding that concentrated the best genetics and removed the poor genetics. Any breeder with decent foundation birds and proper method can do the same over time. Misunderstanding 2. People think Heremans' birds were genetically superior in some mysterious way. False. His birds were genetically superior because inferior genetics were removed generation after generation. Superior genetics aren't magic. Superior genetics are what remain when you remove everything that isn't superior through rigorous selection. Any breeding program can create superior genetics through adequate selection pressure over adequate time. Misunderstanding 3. People think Heremans had secret techniques or methods he didn't share. False. Heremans was remarkably open about his methods with serious fanciers who asked good questions. The secrets were simply principles most people don't apply consistently. Testing thoroughly, selecting ruthlessly, tracking maternal lines, culling inadequate genetics, being patient for decades. These aren't secrets. They're disciplines most people lack. Misunderstanding 4. People think they can buy Heremans genetics and automatically have a success. False. Heremans genetics perform exceptionally in his management system with his selection continuing. Those genetics in someone else's loft might perform well or might not, depending on whether the new owner applies similar selection principles. Genetics is potential, not guarantee. Management and selection determine whether potential is realized. Understanding these points prevents the mistake of thinking Heremans' success came from lucky circumstances rather than systematic method. His success was methodical, built piece by piece over decades. Anyone with similar method and similar patience can build similar success at their scale. Now let's discuss the mental and emotional aspects of applying Heremans' method, because these are often the hardest parts. First, patience. You must accept that building dynasty-level genetics takes 15 to 20 years minimum. Can you commit to a 15-year project? Most people can't. They want results now. This impatience prevents them from ever building anything lasting. If you cannot commit to 15 years of consistent work, don't start. You'll quit halfway through and waste the effort. Second, discipline. You must cull ruthlessly based on data regardless of emotions. Can you cull a bird you like because the data says it's not productive? Can you cull a bird you paid a lot for because it didn't prove itself? Can you maintain selection pressure year after year, even when it means disposing of birds regularly? Most people can't. Their emotions override their discipline. This prevents genetic progress. Third, focus. You must resist distraction by trends, new famous bloodlines, other people's success with different methods. Can you stick with your program for 10 years while other people are buying exciting new birds and winning with them? Can you maintain faith in your long-term approach when short-term results are modest? Most people can't. They chase trends and never commit long enough to any approach. This prevents building anything coherent. Fourth, systematic thinking. You must maintain detailed records, analyze patterns, make decisions based on data rather than hunches. Can you invest time in record keeping that shows no immediate benefit? Can you analyze numbers to identify subtle patterns rather than relying on gut feelings? Most people can't. They breed by intuition and hope rather than analysis. This makes selection less effective. These mental and emotional capabilities matter as much as understanding the technical method. Heremans succeeded partly because of his method, but also because he had the patience, discipline, focus, and systematic thinking to apply that method consistently for decades. Without these psychological characteristics, even perfect technical knowledge won't create dynasty-level results. Let's talk about measuring progress when building a dynasty, because you need to know if your application of the method is working. Short-term measures within 5 years are modest. You should see gradually increasing consistency in racing results from your bred birds. You should see family patterns emerging where certain maternal lines produce better than others. You should see your culling decisions becoming easier because the data clearly shows which birds are worthy and which aren't. These are signs your system is functioning even if dramatic results haven't appeared yet. Medium-term measures, 5 to 10 years, show clearer progress. You should have established maternal families that consistently produce quality. You should see increasing percentages of your young birds racing competitively. You should see your birds beginning to succeed in other people's lofts if you've shared any genetics. Your confidence in your breeding decisions should be high because you have enough data to identify patterns reliably. These signs indicate your dynasty is forming. Long-term measures, 10 to 20 years, show dynasty-level results. Your birds should be dominating your competition level consistently. Other serious fanciers should be seeking your genetics. Your birds should succeed across diverse conditions and in multiple fanciers' management. You should have multiple proven maternal families that breed so consistently you can predict offspring quality with confidence. This is dynasty-level genetics, the result of decades of proper method. If you're not seeing these progressions at the appropriate timescales, something in your application is wrong. Most commonly, selection pressure isn't high enough. You're keeping too many birds instead of only the proven best. Or testing isn't thorough enough. You're making breeding decisions before birds have proven themselves fully. Or consistency is lacking. You're changing strategy before giving it enough time to work. Identify where your application differs from the method and correct it. Finally, let's discuss the legacy aspect of building a dynasty, because this motivates the long-term commitment. Heremans will be remembered in pigeon racing history long after he's gone, because he created genetics that will continue producing quality for decades. His influence extends through thousands of fanciers worldwide who breed from his bloodlines. He built something that transcends his own lifetime. That's what dynasty means. Not just personal success, but creating something lasting that outlives you. You can create the same at your scale. A bloodline you develop over 15 years that consistently produces quality will continue producing after you're done racing. If you share that genetics, it will spread through the sport. Other fanciers will use it, benefit from it, pass it on. You'll have created something lasting. that's deeply satisfying in ways that winning races cannot match. Winning races brings momentary satisfaction. Building a dynasty brings lasting significance. Heremans understood this. His focus was always on building something that would last, not on accumulating trophies. The trophies came as a byproduct of the dynasty, but they weren't the goal. The goal was creating consistently superior genetics that would influence the sport for generations. He achieved that goal through method, patience, discipline, and decades of consistent work. You can achieve the same goal if you're willing to commit to the same approach. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually, certainly, if you apply sound principles consistently for adequate time. That's the promise and the challenge of the Heremans Method. It works for anyone who actually applies it properly for long enough. The question is whether you will. The Heremans Method is not complicated. Test thoroughly over multiple years. Select ruthlessly, keeping only proven genetics. Focus on maternal line production as your primary selection criterion. Concentrate proven genetics through line breeding. Introduce outside genetics rarely, and only when it improves your base. Maintain detailed records to identify patterns. Cull anything that doesn't meet standards. Be patient for 15 to 20 years. That's the complete method. Simple to understand, difficult to apply consistently, extremely effective for those who commit. Most people won't apply it. They'll read this, think it's interesting, and continue breeding the way they always have, randomly hoping for luck. A few people will try it for 2 or 3 years, not see dramatic results, and quit. Fewer still will commit for 5 or 10 years and build something valuable. Very few will commit for 15 to 20 years and build true dynasty-level genetics. But those few who do commit will succeed at a level that casual breeders cannot imagine. Which group will you be in? That's the only question that matters. The method is here. The knowledge is available. The only variable is your commitment. Choose to commit for decades and build something lasting. Choose to apply the method with discipline and patience. Choose to become a creator of superior genetics rather than a consumer of others' genetics. That's the path Heremans walked. That's the path that leads to dynasty. That's the path available to you if you choose it. The journey starts today. The results come in 15 years. The legacy lasts forever. Build your dynasty. Use the method. Commit to the timeline and create something that matters. That's the Heremans Method. That's how legends are built. That's what separates those who win races from those who build dynasties. Choose your path wisely.